Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite members, thank you for your love and dedication. Words cannot express my gratitude. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Stories. Just to let you know, this is a mix-up of different stories, including cryptids for those lovers. Before we get started, you all are in for a very special treat today. A very awesome brother in the narration community has lent his awesome storytelling skills in this collaborated video. He goes by the name of Entropic Society. I didn't think that I would ever get his attention to have him here on Back to Ashes, but he blessed me with a story, so I'm very happy to have him in today's video. If you would, please, in the description below, go over to his channel and show him some love. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. My name is Nick, and I hail from the foggy, unassuming shores of England. But even now, decades later, the memory of that holiday in the mid-90s clings to me like a shroud, whispering in the dead of night. Our son, Tom, was just 4 then, a wide-eyed innocent whose laughter could pierce the gloom, though it did little to ward off the shadows that would soon envelop us. My wife, ever the optimist, had stumbled upon this villa in a tattered holiday brochure, nestled high in the Tuscan hills above a forgotten speck called Lusalina. It promised paradise, ancient stone walls veiled in ivy, olive groves that stretched into eternity, and a price so absurdly low it felt like a trap baited for the unwary. Why was it so cheap? The brochure didn't say, but in my quieter moments, I wondered if it was because the land held secrets, dark, blood-soaked secrets that no one dared to advertise. We booked it anyway. 2 weeks of supposed bliss, paying the deposit with a thrill that masked the faint unease gnawing at my gut. As the days ticked down, I pushed the doubts aside, but they festered unseen. We touched down in Pisa as the sun bled into the horizon, casting long crimson shadows over the tarmac. Tom had wailed through the flight, his tiny fists clenched against the roar of the engines, but a cone of gelato from the airport stall hushed him like a spell. The drive to Lusalina stretched on for 3 interminable hours, winding through increasingly desolate countryside, where the roads narrowed to veins of cracked asphalt, flanked by gnarled trees that clawed at the sky. Darkness swallowed us whole as we ventured deeper, the stars above mocking us with their cold, indifferent light. Tom dozed off in the back, his breath a fragile rhythm against the hum of the engine, while my wife fought sleep, her eyes heavy-lidded in the passenger seat. I gripped the wheel tighter, the exhaustion seeping into my bones like poison. By the time we neared a crossroads, the world had turned pitch black, save for the feeble glow of our headlights slicing through the void. No streetlights, no signs of life, just an endless expanse of rural isolation that pressed in on us, suffocating. I stopped the car, the engine idling like a low growl, and fumbled for the map under the dashboard light. The paper crinkled unnaturally loud in the silence, as if the night itself was listening. "Just a few more miles more," I murmured to my wife, forcing a smile that felt like a lie. 15-20 minutes tops." She nodded weakly, and I turned onto a steep, twisting path that climbed into oblivion. The incline hid what laid ahead, a blind ascent into the unknown. I eased the car forward slowly, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. as if some primal instinct screamed warnings from the depths of my soul. Then it happened. As we crested the hill, a figure erupted from the bushes like a demon summoned from the earth. Our headlights caught him in their glare. A gaunt man with hollow eyes, his face twisted in feral rage. In his hand, a long, double-barreled shotgun gleamed wickedly, barrels aimed straight at my chest. Time fractured. My foot slammed the brakes, tires screeching in protest as the car lurched to a halt. My wife gasped, a sharp intake of terror that echoed my own, her hands flying to her mouth. The man stood there, frozen in the beam, his finger hovering over the trigger, ready to unleash hell. I clawed at the gear shift, desperate for reverse, my mind a whirlwind of panic. Images of blood splattering the windshield, of Tom's small body shattered in the back. But then, another shadow detached from the undergrowth, a second man lunging forward with a hiss. "No!" He shoved the shotgun down, his voice a guttural command that sliced through the night. They stared at us then, their faces paling in the headlights' unforgiving light, horror mirroring our own, but laced with something darker, a realization that we stumbled into a web not meant for us. The second man approached the driver's window, his steps deliberate, like a predator sizing up prey. He tapped on the glass, with knuckles scarred and calloused, and I rolled it down with trembling fingers, the cool night air rushing in like a breath from the grave. He flashed a smile, too wide, too nervous, teeth glinting like knives. "Mosquito, see?" he said, the word slithering out in broken Italian. "I'm very sorry, sir." But his eyes held no remorse, only a calculating gleam as if he were already plotting how to tie up this loose end. I stammered something. "Parla inglés?" "Do you speak English?" My phrasebook Italian evaporating in the fear-soaked air. He shook his head, that melodic no, drawn out like a funeral dirge, then added, "No English." My wife, voice quavering, asked if they were police. He latched onto the word, his smile widening into something grotesque. "Si, police," he lied, smoothly, gesturing us forward with, "Avanti vi," move along. We thanked him as if gratitude could ward off the evil we'd brushed against, and drove on, the car trembling as much as I was. Tom stirred in the back, his sleepy voice piercing the tension. "Mommy? Daddy? Who were those men?" We lied too, calling them friendly police, but my words tasted like ash. We knew the truth. Those weren't cops. No uniforms, no badges, just ragged clothes and a farm shotgun that reeked of vigilante justice, or worse. As the villa came into view, its stone facade looming like a centennial in the moonlight, I felt a chill settle in my spine. It was beautiful, yes, but now it felt tainted, a haven built on a cursed ground. That night, with Tom tucked into bed, his innocent snores a stark contrast to the storm in my mind, I confessed to my wife. "They weren't police," I whispered, the words hanging heavy in the dim lamplight. "That shotgun, it was no official issue. And the way they looked at us, like we'd seen too much." She went still, her face paling as I wove the threads together. The ambush setup, the mistaken identity, the mafia's iron grip on these hills. It made sense, a horrifying puzzle snapping into place. We'd interrupted a hit, and only blind luck had spared us. We debated calling the real police, but the thought curdled my blood. Snitching on the mafia? In their territory? It was suicide. a deliberate invitation for retribution. Better to swallow our fury, a code of silence that bound the living to the dead. We chose survival over justice, but sleep eluded me, the villa's walls creaking like whispers of warning. The next morning dawned unnaturally bright, the sun mocking our unease as we ventured down to Lucilina on foot. The path wound through overgrown fields, shadows lurking in the underbrush where anything could hide. We found a dingy little bar, its faded sign swinging like a noose in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and murmured conversations that hushed as we entered. I ordered coffee, black and bitter, while my wife and Tom fiddled with a battered table football set in a corner alcove that smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. The bartender, a wiry man with eyes like bottomless pits, surprised me by speaking English. We chatted idly, restaurant tips, local lore, but his gaze darted nervously, as if afraid of eavesdroppers. Then, a cluster of grizzled old men at a card table gestured wildly at the television mounted on the wall. The bartender cranked the volume, the news anchor's voice droning in rapid Italian, her face grave. I asked what it was about, and he listened, his expression darkening like storm clouds. "A murder," he translated flatly. "A businessman, gunned down not far from here. Terrible, eh?" My pulse quickened. "How far?" After conferring with the elders in hushed tones, he confirmed it. The exact spot where those men had emerged from the bushes, shotgun poised. A chill slithered down my spine. The victim had arrived after us, stepping into the trap we'd narrowly escaped. I didn't tell my wife right away. Why feed the fear that already gnawed at her? But later, back at the villa, as we dressed for dinner, I spilled it. Her eyes widened in horror. But we both knew. Involvement meant death. Better to bury it deep, pretend the shadows weren't closing in. That evening, we dined in Lucilina, the restaurant's warm glow a false sanctuary amid the encroaching night. The food was divine, rich pastas, savory meats that melted on the tongue, luring even picky Tom into trying bites with glee. But as we asked for the bill, the waiter returned with the owner, a portly man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. In halting English, they explained. The meal was paid for. By whom? Someone. Misunderstanding, the owner said, his voice a low rumble, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting ghosts. At first, confused reigned. We insisted, but they refused our money, ushering us out with forced politeness. The second night, same place, same ritual, free food, that cryptic explanation. By then, the truth slithered into focus. The mafia, atoning for their mistake in the only way they knew, with silent, insidious generosity. We tried other spots, guilt twisting in our guts. Were these poor souls coerced, cooking for free under threat? Or was it a scam, padding the bill to bleed the mob dry? The staff beamed at us, slipping extra gelato to Tom unbidden, his delighted squills a jarring note in the unease. My wife fretted over the sugar, but I saw it for what it was, a lure, binding us deeper into their web. We never saw these men again. Or did we? In the village crowds, I felt eyes on us, invisible watchers tracking our every move. Paranoia bloomed like nightshade. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant gunshot echo, or was it thunder, set my nerves alight. The holiday dragged on, a tapestry of beauty laced with dread. Sun-drenched days, haunted by nocturnal terrors, laughter overshadowed by the specters of what we've invaded. When we left, the villa receded in the rear view like a malevolent memory. Our next Italian jaunt, years later, was to safer climes. No ambushes, no free meals tainted with blood money. We paid for everything, my wallet lighter, but my soul unburdened. Yet, even now, in the quiet of English nights, I wonder, did they let us go? Or are the threads of that encounter still pulling, unseen, waiting to drag us back into the abyss? It was the summer of 2015, a time that now feels like a distant nightmare etched into the recesses of my mind, whispering warnings I can never quite silence. My friends and I, 5 fools chasing the thrill of isolation, were sprawled out in my dingy apartment in Boise, drowning our boredom in cheap beer and the glow of the TV screen. I flipped channels aimlessly until I landed on the History Channel, where a show called Alone was playing. I'd never seen it before, but it hooked me immediately. Contestants dunked in the frozen wilds of Canada, scattered like forgotten bones across the forest, each armed with only the barest scraps of gear. No alliances, no mercy. Just raw survival until the last one standing claimed $1 million, or tapped out like the weakling they were. As the episodes dragged on, showing men breaking under the weight of solitude, an argument ignited among us. Who would win? Who would crack first? By the end of that hazy night, fueled by alcohol and bravado, we'd venture into the wilderness ourselves. A twisted game to crown a king of the wild. Little did I know, the shadows we were about to chase were already watching, hungry. Months slipped by in a blur of planning, but the excitement festered like an untreated wound. We piled into Dave's battered truck, the 5 of us, me, Dave, Kyle, Jay, and Sherrod, heading north toward the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. We laughed about the name, shortening it to the River of No Return to amp up the drama. But even then, it carried on edge, like a curse muttered under breath. This was no ordinary backcountry. It was the largest contiguous wilderness in the lower 48. A sprawling abyss of jagged peaks and choking forests where people vanished without a trace, swallowed by the land's indifferent maw. Living in Boise, it was practically our backyard, but that proximity felt deceptive, like a predator lurking just beyond the porch light. We drove to the speck of a town called North Fork, then trudged to the trailhead that would lead us on foot to Long Tom Mountain. 4 days of hiking in and out, with a single day of rest in between. Fishing in the salmon river's icy veins, swimming in waters that whispered secrets of the drowned. The first day's hike clawed at us, the trail a relentless serpent twisting through dense underbrush and steep inclines. My muscles screamed, but the deeper we went, the more the world outside faded, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by our labored breaths and the occasional snap of a branch, like something unseen mirroring our steps. We made camp at dusk, bled into night, the trees looming in a big, forgotten graveyard. I collapsed into my sleeping bag, exhaustion pulling me under like quicksand. But my dreams were restless, filled with fleeting shapes darting just beyond the fire's flicker. The second day eased a bit, our bodies adapting to the punishment, but the forest seemed to close in tighter, its canopy a suffocating veil blotting out the sky. Reaching the summit of Long Tom Mountain felt like a triumph, the view sprawling out in a panorama of untamed green and jagged rock. But even there, a chill wind carried a faint, acrid scent I couldn't place, like decay masked by pine. We pitched our tents, grabbed towels, and descended to the Salmon River for that promised reprieve. The water was frigid, biting into my skin like needles, but for a moment, it was euphoric, splashing, laughing, casting lines into the current. Dave, our self-proclaimed outdoorsman, reeled in a couple of small fish with his collapsible pole, their scales glinting like stolen silver in the sunlight. We gutted them right there on the rocks, the blood staining the stones in the patterns that looked almost deliberate, like runes etched by an unseen hand. It felt primal, alive, but as we trudged back up the mountain with our catch, a subtle unease wormed its way in, the feeling that the wilderness wasn't celebrating with us, but tolerating us, waiting. Back at camp, Kyle ducked into his tent for something, only to emerge seconds later, his face twisted in mock amusement that quickly soured. "Ha ha, very funny," he snarled, eyes darting between us. "Which one of you assholes took my backpack?" We stared back, confused, insisting we hadn't touched it. But Kyle's sarcasm curled into rage, demanding we return it before he lost his shit. We protested. Pranks weren't our style, especially not something so petty. But as we searched the site, the truth slithered into view like a venomous snake. Someone had prowled through our camp while we were at the river. Not just any thief, a shadow that had waited for us to leave, rifling through our belongings with deliberate malice. Kyle's backpack was gone, along with hundreds in clothes, gear, everything that anchored him to civilization. The air grew thick, tainted by questions that hung unspoken. Who was this intruder? Had they been trailing us from the start, their footsteps ghosting ours? Were they armed, deranged, or something worse? Something that fed on fear? Anger eclipsed the creep factor at first, especially for Kyle, who paced like a caged animal, muttering curses and "why me?" under his breath. Then, a switch flipped in him, his eyes darkening with a feral gleam. "I'm going to find the bastard," he growled, gripping his pistol. The group fractured. Kyle and Jay, fueled by vengeance, wanted to hunt. Me, Dave, and Shareed argued against it, our epic escape turning into a nightmare pursuit. Words flew like barbs, Kyle calling us cowards, his voice echoing unnaturally loud in the still air. Dave suggested relocating camp, but Kyle refused, storming off with Jay into the thickening woods. I watched them go, a knot twisting in my gut as Dave murmured, "They won't find anything. It'll burn off." He was half right. They returned after half an hour, Kyle deflated but simmering, the theft of poison seeping into our veins. Our survival trip was tainted. The isolation we carved, now a cage, reminding us we weren't alone, and whatever shared this void with us was watching, patient. The third day dawned, gray and oppressive, the relaxation we'd planned evaporating like mist. We tried to salvage it, but the camp felt exposed. a target painted on our backs. Dave nixed more fishing. His usual calm cracked. I don't like leaving this place unguarded. He insisted on stockpiling firewood, suggesting we keep the fire roaring through the night and take watches, like soldiers in enemy territory. I laughed it off at first, but his words landed heavy. It's too quiet out there. Better safe than sorry. Dave wasn't prone to paranoia. His childhood fishing trips with his dad made him our anchor in the wild. If he sensed danger, it was real. We all carried pistols, cold comfort against the unknown. But that night, as darkness swallowed the mountain, fear coiled tight. We huddled by the flames, flashlights stabbing into the black, every rustle a potential footfall. Kyle itched for confrontation, his whispers about payback chilling me more than the cold. Sleep came in fitful snatches, watches blurring into a haze of dread, the forest alive with imagined eyes. Sunrise brought no relief. We packed hastily, agreeing to hike out early. One more night in this cursed place before escape. The trail wore us down, uneventful but exhausting, our anger a dull throb. We made camp in the late afternoon, the mood lifting falsely as we convinced ourselves the thief was gone. But fate, or whatever malevolent force governed these woods, had other plans. Sharid wandered off for a bathroom break, pistol in hand, that lingering unease, our constant companion. Minutes later, a scream tore through the air. Not pain, but terror. A guttural curse that propelled us toward him. He met us halfway, face ashen, eyes wide with primal fear. "Someone's out there," he gasped. "Watching me." He'd gone far for privacy, scanning the trees before dropping through. And there, a football field away, a figure stood motionless. But not just any man. His face was painted stark white, a ghostly mask gleaming unnaturally in the dappled light. Sharid bolted without looking back, but the image burned, pale, unblinking, like a specter from a fever dream. We grilled him. Was he sure? Joking? "On my mama, bro," he swore. "Motherfucker looked like a crow ran out of black." Back at camp, Kyle muttered about trail rats, desperate hikers preying on novices. But this was no petty thief. White paint? Stalking us for miles? The game had shifted. We were prey in a ritual we didn't understand. Was he alone or part of a pack? Faces smeared in mockery of death? Armed? Our pistols felt like toys against that unknown. Panic surged. We scrapped the night camp, packing as twilight bled red across the sky. Hiking in darkness was madness, but staying was suicide. The fire a beacon, drawing him near. Flashlights cut feeble paths through the inky void, every step a gamble. We were wired, spinning in paranoid circles, beams sweeping for that pale horror. Hours dragged, silence oppressive until Jay's whisper shattered it. "Dude, what the fuck?" His light fixed on a tree where Kyle's backpack dangled like a hanged man, straps severed, riddled with arrows, feathered shafts protruding like spines from a corpse. We converged, beams illuminating the macabre display. Silence heavy until Sharid breathed. "This can't be happening." Kyle yanked it down over Jay's protest about evidence. What good were cops against a ghost who revealed himself only to terrify? The arrows were common, untraceable, mockery in their ordinariness. We pressed on, the backpack a grim trophy, our nerves frayed to breaking. Dave confessed later his fear wasn't the stalker, but us, trigger-happy in the dark. No more sightings, but the damage was done. We'd been outmatched, humbled by a force that toyed with us like insects. The drive home was a torrent of speculation. How dangerous was he? What if he'd wanted blood instead of fear? We agreed on one thing. The river of no return would claim us no more. But even now, years later, in the safety of city lights, I wake to imagined footsteps, that white face leering from dreams. Was he human, or something the wilderness birthed to guard its secrets? I don't know, but I feel him still, watching, waiting for the next fool to wander in. The drive out to the Rocky Mountains felt like descending into some forgotten abyss, the kind of place where the world thins out and secrets fester in the dark. Annie and I had been chasing this illusion of adventure for months, whispering about it late at night like a forbidden ritual. We craved the isolation, the raw edge of nature where no one else dare tread. But as our car twisted through the narrow, crumbling road, the trees began to close in like guarding a grave. Their branches, gnarled and skeletal, reached out like bony fingers, brushing against the windows like a soft, insistent scratch that set my teeth on edge. I gripped the wheel tighter, telling myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew better. The forest was alive, watchful, and it didn't want us here. Annie sat beside me, her excitement bubbling over in nervous chatter. But even she fell silent as the canopy thickened, blotting out the sky. The GPS had long since given up, its signals swallowed by the endless green void. She'd found the spot on some obscure online forum, a hidden clearing far from the beaten paths, whispered about in threads that vanished as quickly as they appeared. "It's perfect," she'd said, her eyes gleaming with that reckless spark I both loved and feared. No crowds, no noise, just us and the wild. But as the miles dragged on, the air grew heavier, laced with a faint metallic tang of decay, like something long dead was exhaling from the underbrush. I felt it then, that first prickling unease, as if we'd crossed an invisible threshold into a domain that hungered for intruders. When the road finally petered out into a barren patch of earth, encircled by trees so dense they formed an impenetrable barrier, the sun was already dipping low, bleeding rose across the horizon. The clearing wasn't welcoming. It was a trap, a hollow space where light struggled to penetrate, and shadows pooled like spilled ink. We stepped out, our boots sinking into the soft, loamy soil that seemed to clutch at us, reluctant to let go. The silence hit me like a physical force, absolute, suffocating. No birdsong pierced the air, no leaves whispered in the breeze. It was as if the forest had drawn in a collective breath, holding it in anticipation. I mentioned it to Annie, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the void. She laughed it off, a brittle sound that echoed mockingly back from the trees. "That's the peace we came for," she said, but her eyes flickered to the encroaching darkness, betraying the lie. We hurried to set up the tent, our movements frantic in the fading light, as if some unspoken urgency propelled us. The fabric snapped taut under our hands, but even that small noise felt like an intrusion, a challenge to whatever lurked beyond sight. As twilight deepened into night, we kindled a meager fire, its flames sputtering reluctantly against the chill that seeped from the ground. We huddled close, the warmth a fragile barrier against the encroaching cold. Annie tried to lighten the mood with ghost stories, her voice weaving tales of lost hikers and vengeful spirits. But each word hung in the air like a curse, amplifying the dread coiling in my gut. The shadows cast by the fire weren't playful. They twisted and writhed along the tree line, elongated forms that mimicked humanoid shapes, reaching, grasping. I caught myself staring into them, half convinced I saw eyes glinting back, cold, unblinking orbs that vanished when I blinked. As the fire dwindled to embers, we retreated to the tent, zipping ourselves into what felt like a flimsy cocoon. Lying there in my sleeping bag, the silence pressed down on me like a shroud, so profound it hummed in my ears. Annie drifted off quickly, her breathing steady and deep, oblivious to the weight of it all. I envied her ignorance, squeezing my eyes shut against the blackness that seeped through the thin nylon walls. But sleep evaded me, my mind racing with phantom whispers, imagined rustles, distant sighs that could have been the wind or something far worse. The forest wasn't empty. It was waiting, biding its time, and I could feel its gaze on us, patient and malevolent. It was deep in the night when the first sound shattered the stillness. A metallic clang, sharp and deliberate, like chains dragging across rusted iron. My eyes flew open, heart slamming against my ribs as adrenaline flooded my veins. I lay frozen, straining to listen, praying it was a dream. But it came again. Clang, clang. Closer now, reverberating through the ground like a summons from the depths. Whatever made it wasn't random. It was intentional. A lure or a warning. Annie stirred faintly but didn't wake, her form a vulnerable silhouette beside me. I crept toward the tent flap, my breath shallow and ragged, fingers trembling as I inched the zipper down just a crack. The night air slithered in, cold and cloying, carrying the faint stench of rot and something sharper, like ozone after a storm. Then the screech erupted, a piercing, inhuman wail that tore through the darkness, vibrating in my bones like the grind of tortured metal. It wasn't an animal. No creature of flesh and blood could produce such a sound. It was agony distilled, a cry from some abysmal nightmare. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end as I peered into the gloom. There, at the edge of the fire's dying glow, it stood. An abomination that defied the natural order. Towering, emaciated, its limbs stretched impossibly long, joints bent at grotesque angles as if broken and reset by cruel hands. Its head was a perversion of a deer's skull, elongated and warped, antlers twisting like thorns from a crown of bone. The eyes, oh God, those eyes, were voids, bottomless pits that sucked in the light, reflecting nothing but endless hunger. Its maw gaped wide, revealing jagged teeth that gleamed wetly, stained with what I prayed was shadow, but knew was something fouler. A low guttural growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that churned my insides, promising violation and torment. It shuffled forward, dragging one malformed foot behind it, the motion accompanied by a sickening scrape of claws on earth. I couldn't move, transfixed by the horror, my mind screaming denials even as terror rooted me in place. It knew I was watching. I could sense its awareness, a predatory intelligence that savored my fear. Slowly, it circled the tent, its presence a palpable weight, brushing against the fabric with deliberate slowness. Talons raked along the side, a long, languid scratch that whispered of flesh parting under pressure. I bit back a whimper, curling into myself, willing invisibility. The creature paused, its breath a ragged hiss just inches away, as if inhaling my scent, committing it to memory for the hunt to come. Minutes stretched into eternities, each circuit around our fragile shelter a torment. It would halt abruptly, unleashing another screech that echoed through the trees like a harbinger of doom, testing our resolve, daring us to emerge. I imagined it smiling in that twisted maw, relishing the game. Annie murmured in her sleep, shifting closer, and for a heart-stopping moment, I feared she'd awaken and draw its But she remained ensnared in dreams, blind to the nightmare unfolding mere feet away. The thing's footsteps vibrated through the ground, heavy and uneven, imprinting its malice into the soil. It wasn't just stalking, it was marking us, claiming this night as its own. As the first sickly gray of dawn bled into the clearing, the sounds receded, the creature melting back into the forest's embrace. But relief was a lie. I knew it lingered, a shadow among shadows, patient as death. I hadn't slept, my body a taut wire of vigilance, jumping at every imagined creak. When light finally pierced the tent, I shook Annie awake, my voice a hoarse rasp. "We have to leave, now." She blinked groggily, confusion etching her features, but the raw panic in my eyes silenced her protests. As we packed, she spotted the gashes in the tent, deep, deliberate furrows that wept dew like open wounds. Her face paled, fear mirroring mine. What did this?" Outside, the clearing mocked us with its stillness, the air thick and unmoving, as if the forest was waiting. Then we saw the prints, enormous, elongated impressions circling our sight, claws gouged deep into the earth like accusations. They trailed into the woods, vanishing into the undergrowth that seemed denser, more alive than before. No animal left such marks. These were the footprints of something ancient and profane, a relic from the mountain's buried horrors, awakened by our trespass. We fled toward the trail, bags slung over shoulders, our footsteps hurried and uneven. The trees loomed taller, branches intertwining overhead like a cage, the path twisting in ways it hadn't the day before, as if the forest conspired to ensnare us. Every snap of a twig sent jolts of dread through me. My neck prickled with the certainty of being watched. Annie's breath came in gasps, her hand clutching mine in a vice of terror. And then it came. The screech, amplified in the daylight, a bone-rattling wail that shattered the illusion of safety. It was closer, pursuing, the thunder of heavy footfalls crashing through the brush behind us. "Run!" I screamed, and we bolted, legs pumping in blind panic, the world narrowing to the pounding of our hearts and the rasp of our lungs. Branches whipped at our faces, drawing blood that tasted of copper and defeat. The footsteps grew louder, a relentless pursuit that whispered promises of agony. We burst from the trees at last, the car a beacon in the open. But even as we dove inside, slamming doors and revving the engine, I glanced back. The forest stared, its depths impenetrable. But I swear I saw movement, a flash of that elongated form, eyes fixed on us with unquenchable malice. We tore down the road, miles blurring into a haze of fear, neither of us speaking. Words were futile against what we'd unleashed. That thing wasn't gone. It had tasted our terror, imprinted our sense, and in the quiet moments since, when night falls and silence creeps in, I hear it still. The distant clang, the echoing screech, waiting for us to return. Because deep down I know it never lets go.
I had been homeless for 2 years when I found the Shady Acre apartment complex. Before that, I had been sleeping under roadways and behind dumpsters, which were some of the lowest points in my life. Having found the mostly completed apartments, being abandoned before they were officially completed, was like hitting the jackpot for someone like me. Tucked away in a cleared lot nestled against the woods, on the slower part of town, the Shady Acres were a complex for newer families and lower-income individuals, but somehow, it never found itself finally being completed. The walls were not painted, and the flooring was not yet installed, but aside from the minor features, the place was practically livable. Of course, electric wasn't working alongside the water and plumbing, but as the saying goes, beggars can't be choosers. I peeked my head inside as I entered the first floor. Tools, materials, and odds and ends still laid strewn about, as if someone was going to come back to finish the job, or at least clean up the mess, but it appeared that no one ever did. I grabbed a sizable pipe laying on the ground, just in case. Homeless people, if startled, can and will turn violent very quickly. I did a brief inspection of the main floor, peeking my head inside of doorways to confirm that I was alone in this substantially sized building. But sure enough, I couldn't find anyone else. As I continued to inspect the main floor, I found a stairway. A metal door once stood in the way, but now laid on the ground. It was clear that someone had damaged it with some type of tool in order to keep it open. I went to the stairway and looked inside. The natural light provided by the sun, aided by the many windows, could only spill over so much. Inside was a set of stairs going both upwards, but also downwards below. I didn't have a flashlight, but what little natural sun entered the stairway was just enough to give me the courage to explore upwards. I went up the metal stairs quietly, so as to not alarm anyone else to my presence here. The second floor was nearly identical to the first. I walked down the halls gripping the pipe, ready to defend myself from any unknown attackers. Again, much like the first floor, I didn't see anyone. However, I did find troubling signs of people having lived here at one point. I saw an old mattress littered with trash and old cigarettes, clothes tossed in a pile in the corner of the room. Several dark stains covered the floor, and one splattered on the wall next to the head of the mattress. My heart sank. It was more than likely something sinister had been committed here. I was going to turn to leave, but alongside the disheartening evidence of someone being here, I found a flashlight and an old pistol. I took both and checked the gun to see that it still had 3 bullets remaining in the cylinders. I was going to leave, but seeing how now that I had a gun and a flashlight, this changes things. The flashlight worked perfectly, emitting a strong blue LED light on the stained wall when I clicked it on. I still kept the pipe with me as a backup, but the pistol was now firmly gripped in my right hand. The second floor had bits and pieces of trash here and there, but nothing else as concerning as what I saw in that one room. I entered the stairway with my flashlight guiding me. Unlike the first 2 floors, the third floor had an actual door standing at the entrance. Lucky for me, the handle turned slowly when I tried it, and granted me access. A quick inspection of the door revealed a marvelous find. This door could be locked from the inside. If this floor was cleared, this would be a great setup. I could lock the door and prevent any vagrants, much like myself, coming up here and killing me in my sleep. All I would need to do is verify that the floor was clear, and I'd be all set. The third floor had varied greatly from the first two. No bits of drywall on the floor, or discarded nails laying haphazardly. There still wasn't any electricity, but nothing my new flashlight couldn't handle. The floor was unfinished but oddly clean, as if it was getting prepped for carpet or new flooring before this place shut down. I cleared each room slowly, making sure to check every closet and cupboard before finally letting my guard down. I went back to the stairway and locked the door, preventing anyone else from coming up. I picked a room facing the parking lot. That way I could look out and see if anyone was coming. I spent the rest of the day in my newfound home. The flashlight and gun were an amazing find, but that unsettling sight of blood-stained floor and walls were somewhat concerning. Maybe it was something else. Perhaps someone spilled something there and it just looked bad, I thought to myself, trying to not freak myself out as much. The thought also crept into my mind about how I had yet to inspect the basement and what horrors lurked down there. For being homeless, I was fairly paranoid. I made myself a game plan for tomorrow that I would go out and find cheap furniture and food to fill my bare-bone apartment. It would take several trips, but well worth the effort. Nighttime and boredom eventually found me. I sat in the corner of the room trying to get comfortable and let sleep carry me away into tomorrow, but it was difficult. Sure enough, I managed to fall asleep, but staying asleep was another story. I woke up in the middle of the night. I didn't have anything to check the time, but it was several hours before the sun would be rising. I got up feeling the urge to go to the bathroom. This complex didn't have running water, so I'd have to go outside to relieve myself. I grabbed the gun and the flashlight and walked over to the stairway and unlocked the door. I went down the 2 flights of stairs and walked out to the back to go to the bathroom. The back of the complex was as neglected as the complex itself. Tall weeds filled the field that stretched out to the dark trees. Moonlight was scarce, and a cool chill breezed over me as I went to the bathroom. I glanced at the complex as I did my business. Anxiety had yet to find me, as I was still sleepy. I could hear cars off in the distance from the nearby highway, but no animal life could be heard. It was probably too cold for them, I thought as I pulled my pants up and made my way inside. I entered the hollow shell of the first floor. Stealth was not my main concern, seeing that sleep was my only goal. I entered the stairway, ready to ascend back up to my room of safety, when I stopped. For the briefest of moments, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like mumbling down below into the basement. My flashlight was on, but I didn't dare shine it down into the basement. In fact, a moment of curiosity washed over me as I turned my flashlight off and listened in the stairway. I gripped the gun as I stepped over to the stairs that led downwards. My suspicions were confirmed as I felt my way down a step or two to hear more clearly the rambling of someone down there. I paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. Whoever was down there sounded as if they were speaking, and no one else was responding. Perhaps a mentally ill person took shelter down there. I walked back up the stairs silently, as the soft mumblings of whoever was down there slowly faded beneath the stairs. I was fairly fit and mentally strong, so having an altercation with anyone would be more likely in my favor. I made it to the 3rd floor, and the sound was no longer existent. It was clear that the distance between us had enough cushion to drown out the sound from either of us, which was relieving. I made sure to lock the door to the stairway before heading back to my room. Although the realization I wasn't alone in this building was brief and honestly quite harmless, it made me find sleep all the more difficult. I don't know if I slept much that night, but I woke up feeling very tired. I got up and glanced out the window to see the complex parking lot empty and the sun beaming over the distant trees. I unlocked the stairway door and went down the stairs and outside. I spent the day in town, getting things ready for my new place. The local thrift store had a cheap air mattress that I purchased, but it didn't come with a pump. I loaded up other essentials, like huge gallon-sized jugs of water and food that would be easy to make or didn't require power. After making a trip or two back to the empty complex, my room was decent enough for me to not have to worry about it for a week or so. The only thing I wasn't able to work out was the bathroom situation. That would require me to go down the sets of stairs and out back, facing the woods. I was going to go into the basement later that day, but got caught up doing other things, and by the time I was available, the sun had set. This wouldn't affect the actual lighting of the basement, obviously, but I didn't want to face whatever was down there and come up to a pitch black night. Besides, whoever was down there didn't seem aware of me or my setup, and that was enough comfort for me to leave that problem for another day. I made sure to use the bathroom around back before going back up to my room. I didn't want to have to make the bathroom hike in the middle of the night again. While I was using the restroom, I peered out into the woods, several hundred yards away. I wasn't sure how long I'd be able to keep up the abandoned apartment situation, so I briefly considered checking out the woods as a backup if I were to be found out. Again, that would be another task I would save for daylight. The woods seemed just as terrifying as the dark basement below. I went back inside, flashlight in hand. As I approached the stairwell, I noticed that on the ground, dark streaks of a mysterious liquid leading down the stairs. The stains mixed with the unfinished floor looked ominous. It was hard to tell exactly what it was, but I didn't like what I was seeing. I turned off my light as I entered the stairway, as to not alert who was below. I made sure to be quiet, but my pace was probably quicker than what it should have been. I opened the third floor and locked it behind me. I did a quick inspection of the third floor as a safety precaution, but everything looked how I left it. I was tired from all the walking, mainly having to carry all my stuff around, and setting up my room took all my energy. I laid on my air mattress and closed my eyes, trying not to think about anything as sleep began to grab hold of my consciousness, when a faint noise jarred me awake. It was subtle, but my mind, being on high alert, was able to detect movement down below. Normally, I would not have been able to hear what was rummaging down beneath, but since the complex didn't have windows to insulate the noise, I could faintly hear the sound of someone walking around. The shuffling wasn't terribly loud, but whatever it was clearly working its way up the complex. What concerned me wasn't the noise itself, but rather how things sounded. There was a hint of stealth in the movements, like whoever it was didn't want to be detected. I followed the sounds beneath me as I laid in darkness. I lost track of where they had went when they were over near the stairwell. I sat up on my mattress and looked over in the direction of the stairs. Did I lock the door to the stairs? I thought. I had been so busy that day that it was very likely that I had forgotten. I got up slowly, doing my best to keep my sound low. In my hurry, I only brought my flashlight to guide me through the darkness of the halls. I quickly made it to the doorway and tugged on the handle. I did remember. I breathed a sigh of relief and turned my light off. I sat by the door, my nerves slowly getting worked up. I need to stop overthinking, I whispered as I sat in silence after spending 15 minutes trying to locate the sound beneath me. I was ready to get up and head back to my bed when a jostling of the door handle startled me. Someone was outside the door. A brief rustling on the handle shocked my anxiety as I sat in darkness. I could hear someone talking to themselves, but the handle had stopped shaking. Whoever was on the other side had stopped their attempt to gain entry, but still stood outside the door. I stared at it, petrified of what would happen if the door lock no longer held. Would it be another person, like me, seeking refuge and wanting to spend the night with a roof over their head? Or was it something else? The person on the other side of the door left the door almost immediately, but still stayed within the complex. Fear gripped me to the door, not allowing me to move. It was clear that this building had another uninvited guest, but that wouldn't last. As I was debating on how to proceed, I heard another sound, but this one didn't come from the other side of the door, but beneath me. The piercing sound of a shriek filled the complex. Whoever had the misfortune of finding themselves on the lower levels began to shuffle around. They tried to get to the first floor, but I could hear a struggle and more screaming coming from the stairway. The sound of commotion erupted. Screams of pain and terror etched up the stairway, but not for long. The screams quickly died, and the sound of something being dragged away slowly faded down into the basement below. I couldn't be sure, but it sounded as if I just heard a murder take place. I sat by the stairway all night, eyes wide. I couldn't bring myself down enough to enjoy the luxury of sleep. When the sun finally rose, I found the courage to get up and head to my room. I didn't go outside that day, despite having the urgent need of using the bathroom. I ended up just using an empty room and designated that as my bathroom area, until I figured out how to get out of this place. I had enough food and water to last me a couple of days, so I had time to figure out what I wanted to do. During the day, sleep finally overcame me, and I drifted to a realm of peace, but that wouldn't last. I woke up later in the day. The sun was completely smothered behind rain clouds, and loud rumblings of thunder rolled in the distance. I could hear a few droplets hit the roof and the windowsill, a prelude of what was to come. The complex was much darker now. My flashlight was needed for just about anything. The day was only going to get darker, so I had to decide. Stay another night and hope that I can evade notice for 10 or so more hours, or sneak my way out of here. I grabbed the pistol and decided to try my luck. I packed up as much stuff as I could carry in one take and headed for the stairs. I made my way over to the door and unlocked it, my light beaming into the thick darkness below. I made sure to check the close was clear before leaving my sanctuary. I slowly descended the stairs, doing my best to navigate the metal steps while also keeping my noise down. I slowly completed the first flight of steps, and nothing seemed out of place. On the second floor, my fears had been confirmed. I could see drag marks leading to the stairs, with stains accompanying it. I wanted to check out the second floor more, but my nerves wouldn't allow it. The drag marks continued down the steps, leaving thick stains of blood and bits and pieces of flesh. This wasn't just a killing. This was a mutilation. Whoever had done this was disturbed, and they were the last person I wanted to encounter in this dark stairway. I needed to leave. The rain had already begun to come down now. I would get soaked the second I'd step foot outside, but I had to do it. I was frustrated by this new development, since I would not be able to hear as well if something was heading towards my direction. I worked my way down to the first floor, but halfway down, my light reached something at the bottom of the stairs that stopped me cold in my tracks. Standing in the corner of the stairway next to the exit stood an absolutely horrid creature. The creature stood hunched facing the corner. My light only caught the lower half of the figure before I turned it off, but it was enough for me to piece what I thought the creature looked like together. The brief moment of horror revealed something blocking my exit. Had it not been standing, I would have thought it was a rotting corpse. Flesh peeled from what limbs I could see, and bone appeared to be jetting out of the lower spine. I didn't get to see the rest of it, and I'm kinda glad I didn't. I held my breath as my heart began to race. I was immersed in darkness with whatever this thing was, a dozen or so feet away from me. Rain and thunder continued outside, now thankfully concealing my sound. I couldn't see anything, but what little I could hear, it didn't sound like it had moved. I stood petrified on the stairs, knowing fully well I wasn't able to make it out of here this way, at least in one piece. In moments like this, you really don't think clearly. You can only think of survival and nothing else. I'd never seen anything like this before. I wasn't sure what kind of gun I had, or if it would even affect this creature in any meaningful way, but I wasn't going to test it now. I began to backstep up the stairs awkwardly. My hands were full, and my heavy pack made the unnatural backpedaling even more difficult. I went for another step back when my shoe didn't clear the step, and I fell backwards. Out of reaction, I dropped the gun and my flashlight to brace myself, reaching out for non-existent handrails to catch my fall. The thud of the heavy flashlight on the metal stairs clamored loudly as it fell down the stairs, echoing in the stairwell. I gasped. A shock of anxiety and dread flooded my system. Without a doubt, I had gained the attention of whatever lurked just beneath me. I dropped my backpack to lighten my load and felt around for the gun. Shrieks filled the complex. As an odd twist of events, it would appear that I had startled whatever was down there. I could hear shuffling beneath me. Its attention focused briefly on the flashlight that came to a stop, buying me precious time to find my only weapon to defend myself. I felt around, my hands petting the ground, still feeling the wet stains of drag marks from earlier. I was so focused on finding the gun, I hadn't noticed the creature was no longer interested in the flashlight and had begun ascending the stairs. Finally, I felt something solid and gripped it tightly. It took me a few moments to orient myself with the weapon, but before I could, I was tackled on the ground. Immediately, I felt sharp pain in my side as I was now being attacked. I could feel claws beginning to slash out my outer coat and heavy pressure on my chest. I pressed the barrel in the direction I heard the shrieking and felt something solid. I pulled the trigger 3 times and my hand knocked back from the power. The gun burst briefly illuminated the area. The flashes of images haunted my vision. I could briefly see in those very few moments what appeared to be a decomposing demon. It was so quick and I was in so much pain that I wasn't able to process everything right then. The pressure relieved off my chest as it seemed I had injured this grotesque attacker. However, I still heard movement squirming around on the ground and loud horrifying screams. I left the empty gun in my backpack with all my stuff and ran past the sounds of shuffling. I went to the stairs and went as quickly as I could without falling in the dark. The pain in my side seemed to disappear as adrenaline began to pump in my system. I made it to the first floor and I kicked the flashlight that I had dropped earlier. I picked it up and turned it on and ran out of there. I left the complex with whatever it was still screaming inside. The warm rain slowly drenching me the further I jogged away. The screams never did stop. They just muffled the further I went off into the dark, rainy night. When I was a good distance away, a part of me wanted to glance back and shine the light on the complex. Perhaps my demonic attacker had gotten better and was now pursuing me. But not looking back would be a risk that I was willing to take.
I'm a 22-year-old from a nowhere town in the dead heart of England, where the hills roll endless and the silence suffocates. My life is a blur of monotony, work, eat, scroll, sleep, punctuated by the gnawing claws of anxiety and depression that tear at my mind. They twist my thoughts into nightmares, conjuring terrors that feel too real, too close. I've always been drawn to the dark corners of lore, skinwalkers, wendigos, creatures that stalk the edges of reality. They're supposed to haunt the Americas, not this forgotten patch of rural England. Yet, something found me. Something that makes my blood run cold and my skin goosebump with dread. This is my story, and it's no dream. It's a descent into a waking nightmare that's left me questioning what's real and what's waiting just beyond the veil. It began Tuesday night after a long shift at work. I trudged home at around 3 p.m., the gray sky pressing down like a blackout curtain. My routine was mechanical. Dinner, phone, a nap to dull the ache in my skull. By 11:45 p.m., I'd logged off my Xbox, brushed my teeth, and set my alarms. 5:25 and 5:30 a.m., sharp, for the next day's grind. But as I stood in my bathroom, a sickening weight settled in my gut. It wasn't the usual anxiety, the kind that hums like static. This was heavier, primal, like the air itself was watching me. My room is small, its centerpiece a wide window that opens onto the flat roof of the house's extension. It's big enough to climb through, big enough for something to climb in. The curtains hung slightly parted, a sliver of darkness peering through. I felt it. Eyes, unseen but piercing, boring into me from the other side of the glass. My heart thudded, but I forced myself to move, yanking the curtains open with trembling hands. Nothing. Just the empty night, the rolling fields beyond, and the faint hum of a distant car. I blamed exhaustion, laughed it off, and crawled into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. The air felt wrong, thick with an unspoken threat. When I finally drifted off, the nightmare began. My name, whispered, faint but unmistakable, slithered through the darkness. Christian. Christian. Over and over, like a chant from some unholy choir. I bolted upright, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The house was silent, my family asleep, but the voice lingered, echoing in my skull. Against all reason, I got up, pulled on my shoes, and stepped outside. The street was unnaturally still, the air heavy with a chill that didn't match the mild evening. I started walking, my feet moving as if drawn by some unseen thread. My street was short, maybe 50 yards, but as I walked, it stretched endlessly. The houses repeated, their windows dark, their doors like sealed tombs. The voice grew louder, more insistent, calling me toward something I couldn't see. The rolling grasslands beyond the town shimmered under a moonless sky, stretching into an impossible void. It felt like I'd slipped out of the world, into a place where time and space were broken, a limbo where nothing was as it should be. After what felt like weeks of walking, I saw it. The spring-filled asylum, an abandoned husk that had always loomed at the edge of my childhood curiosity. Its crumbling walls and shattered windows stood like a monument to forgotten suffering. The air grew rancid as I approached, a stench like rotting meat and sour earth that clawed at my throat. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. My name echoing through the hollows of my mind, bouncing off the asylum's decayed facade. I reached the door, its splintered wood gaping like a maw. And then, my alarm blared. I woke, gasping, my body drenched in sweat. My dad was in the kitchen when I stumbled downstairs. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice light but his eyes searching. I didn't tell him. How could I? I went to work, shaken, my mind replaying the dream like a looped reel of horror. The asylum, the smell, the voice, they clung to me, refusing to fade. That night, I told my mates on Xbox about the dream. One, an American lad, laughed darkly. "Sounds like a skinwalker, mate. They call your name, lure you out. You didn't answer, did you?" His words hit like a punch. Skinwalkers weren't supposed to be here. They were myths, tied to distant lands. But the more I read online, the more it fit. The stalking, the mimicry, the relentless pursuit. I logged off early, my stomach churning, and tried to sleep. But that feeling returned. Eyes on me, watching through the crack in my curtains. I checked again. Nothing. Just the empty night. The second night was worse. As I drifted toward sleep, my body froze, trapped in that liminal space between waking and dreaming. My name again, but this time it was a plea, a desperate wail. "Christian, help me, please." The voice was layered, as if spoken by many mouths, some human, some not. Then came the scratching, long, deliberate scrapes against my window, like claws dragging across glass. A low, guttural chuckle followed, taunting. "Won't you let me in, Christian? Won't you help me?" My arms were the only part of me that could move, and with a trembling hand, I pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, but the voice grew louder, the glass vibrating as if it might shatter. Outside, the field seemed to writhe, the darkness twisting like a living thing. My alarm saved me again, ripping me back to reality. I ran downstairs, splashing cold water on my face, trying to drown out the echo of that voice. Work that day was torture. Every time someone called my name, my pulse spiked, sweat beading on my forehead. I was unraveling, my mind a tangle of fear and doubt. Was it stress? The energy drinks? The late nights? I grasped at rational explanations, desperate to anchor myself. That evening, I decided to confront it. I'd walk the route from my dream to the asylum in the light of dusk, prove to myself it was nothing, a stupid, reckless idea, but I was desperate to reclaim control. The evening was too quiet. No cars, no birds, no hum of life. Just me, my footsteps echoing on the empty road. The asylum loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the fading light. As I neared, that smell hit me again. Decaying flesh, thick and choking. It wasn't a dream this time. It was real, clinging to the air like a curse. Then I heard it, my name, sung in a low, mocking tone, dripping with malice. "Christian." It came from the asylum, from the black voids of its windows, where the darkness seemed to pulse, alive and hungry. I froze, my breath shallow, my face drained of color. The building reeked of death, its walls whispering secrets of the suffering it had housed for centuries. The Springfield Asylum wasn't just abandoned. It was cursed, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. I should have run, but my feet carried me closer, drawn to the overgrown garden behind the structure, a tangle of weeds and twisted trees that felt like a graveyard for something older than time. Then I saw them. Two green eyes, glowing like sickly flames, staring from the shadows of the orchid. They burned through me, pinning me in place. The figure emerged, slow and deliberate, its form wrong in every way. It was deer-like, standing on hind legs, but its body was a mockery of nature. Half its face was a skull, flesh hanging in ragged strips, a yellowed snout dripping with saliva that glistened in the dim light. It grew taller as it moved, stretching from 5 feet to 10, its limbs cracking like dry branches. A bony arm extended, ending in a hand, not a hoof, but a grotesque humanoid claw. It pointed at me, and the voices erupted. Whispers, screams, laughter, pleas. My name in 1,000 accents, 1,000 tongues, some human, some impossibly alien. It was as if the asylum itself was speaking, its history of pain and madness given voice. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, and ran. The creature didn't chase, but I felt its gaze, its finger still pointing, as it melted back into the foliage. I didn't stop until I was home, locking every door, shutting every curtain, diving into bed like a child hiding from the dark. I'm writing this now, a day later, my hands shaking. The asylum's history gnaws at me. Tales of patients chained, experiments gone wrong, souls trapped in its walls. Was it a skinwalker? Something older tied to the land itself? I don't know. But tonight, as I sit in my room, the curtains drawn tight, I hear it again. A faint whisper just beyond the glass. Christian. It's out there, waiting, and I'm terrified to sleep. The valley was a desolate sprawl, a forgotten crease in the earth where the sun seemed to hesitate before rising. Dry, brittle grass clung to rolling hills, interrupted only by sagging fences and the occasional farmhouse. Its windows dark, like eyes that refused to meet yours. The towns were ghosts of themselves, clusters of crumbling brick buildings and faded signs, home to a few thousand souls who live like shadows through their daily routines. I'd done a few runs here before, hauling steel beams, concrete blocks, bags of gravel. Simple stuff. Point A to point B, no questions asked. The routes were predictable, the drop-offs unremarkable. But this job, this one, was different. The email arrived at 3 a.m., a cold, clinical message that felt like it was watching me as I read it. No sender name, just a string of coordinates and a vague directive. Pick up a trailer at a remote location, haul it through town, drop it at a pullout marked by orange cones. The word unorthodox stood out, sharp and deliberate, like a warning whispered in the dark. No paved roads beyond the county highway. No warehouse, no yard, no sign of life. Just a trailer, alone, waiting. The payout was triple what I'd expect for a job this short. My gut twisted, but greed is a powerful silencer. I told myself it was just some eccentric farmer, some rich fool who thought rules were for other people. I dealt with their kind before. Arrogant, impatient, always waving cash to make problems disappear. But deep down, I knew this wasn't that. The next morning, I set out as the sky bled red, the horizon jagged with hills that seemed to lean closer as I drove. The county highway was empty, the air thick with mist that clung to my windshield like a second skin. The coordinates led me to a dusty turnout, a scar of dirt carved into the roadside. And there it was. The trailer. No lock, no chain, no guard. Just a hulking metal box, sitting in the dirt like it had been abandoned by God himself. I circled it, my boots crunching on gravel, the silence so heavy it felt like it would crush me. The trailer was pristine, its surface gleaming under the weak morning light, but that only made it worse. It didn't belong here, in this nowhere place, unguarded and untouched. I checked the tires, the hitch, the bolt. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. My stomach turned as I hooked it to my rig, the clang of metal echoing like a warning bell. The trailer had no markings, no logos, no serial numbers, no faded stickers from some long-defunct company. Just smooth, featureless steel, reflecting the world around it like a mirror that refused to show its own truth. I climbed into the cab, my hands slick with sweat, and pulled onto the highway. The instructions were clear. Haul it through town, drop it on the other side. Simple. But as I drove, the weight of the trailer seemed to grow. Not physically, but in some deeper, primal way. It was as if it was watching me, pressing against the back of my skull, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. The valley's main town was a skeleton of a place, its streets lined with buildings that looked like they'd given up decades ago. People shuffled along the sidewalks, their faces blank, their eyes sliding past my rig like they knew better than to look too long. I passed a diner with a flickering neon sign, a barber shop with a pole that spun too slowly, a church with a steeple that leaned just enough to make you uneasy. The trailer's weight pulled at my thoughts, dragging them to dark places. What was I carrying? Guns? Drugs? Something worse? The payout was too high for gravel or steel. I tried to shake the thought, but it clung to me, heavy as the mist outside. The instructions led me through the heart of the town, past the last of the storefronts, and into the wilderness beyond. The road narrowed, the pavement giving way to a rutted dirt track that wound through dense, twisted trees. Their branches clawed at the sky, casting shadows that moved like living things. The further I drove, the more the world seemed to close in, the air growing thick with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, something metallic. My phone had no signal out here, the bars on the screen long gone. If something went wrong, I was alone. Just me, the rig, and whatever was in that trailer. The pullout appeared after miles of nothing, marked by a cluster of orange cones that glowed unnaturally in the dim light. I maneuvered the rig into place, the tires crunching on loose dirt, and killed the engine. The silence was immediate, suffocating. No birds, no wind, just the faint hum of my own blood in my ears. I climbed out, my boots sinking into the earth, and walked to the back of the trailer. It was unlocked. No padlock, no seal, nothing to keep the world out. That was wrong. Every haul I'd ever done was secured, even the small ones. My hand hovered over the latch, curiosity and dread wrestling in my chest. I told myself I had a right to know what I was carrying. I told myself it was just meat or machinery or something mundane. But I knew better. I swung the doors open, and the stench hit me like a fist. Rotting meat, thick and cloying, a smell that crawled into my throat and stayed there. I gagged, pressing my sleeve to my face, my eyes watering as I peered inside. The trailer was packed with raw meat, slabs of beef, pork, poultry, stacked on metal racks like offerings to some forgotten god. Blood and fat oozed onto the floor, pooling in greasy crimson puddles that shimmered under my flashlight. This wasn't a refrigerated trailer. The meat was spoiling, festering, the air inside heavy with decay. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding, the image seared into my mind. Who hauls meat like this, knowing it'll rot? Why here, in the middle of nowhere, where no one could possibly retrieve it in time? I unhooked the trailer, my hands trembling, and climbed back into the cab. The drive back to town was a blur, the road stretching endlessly before me, the trees leaning closer, their branches scraping at the edges of my vision. I told myself it was done, that I delivered the trailer and the job was over. But the smell lingered, clinging to my clothes, my skin, my thoughts. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the image of that rotting meat burning behind my eyes. Why through town? Why away from the farms? There was nothing on the other side but old mining roads, abandoned for decades. What was the point? The next morning, my bank account showed the payment had cleared. But it wasn't from a farmer or a local business. It was from a government account, the kind with cryptic codes and no name attached. My blood ran cold. Why was the government paying for a haul like that? What were they doing with a trailer full of rotting meat left in the wilderness? I couldn't let it go. I had to know. I grabbed my Chevy, not the rig, and drove back to the pullout. The orange cones were still there, standing like statues in the dirt. But the trailer was gone. I walked the perimeter, my boots kicking up clouds of dust, and found tire tracks. Deep, heavy marks that led away from the pullout and into the woods. Not toward town, but deeper into the wild. I followed them, my truck rattling over uneven ground, the trees closing in until the sky was just a sliver above. The tracks wound through the forest, past jagged rocks and gnarled roots, until they stopped at the mouth of an old mine. The entrance was a black, gaping wound in the hillside, its edges rough and uneven, like teeth. The tire tracks led straight inside, disappearing into the darkness. No truck could fit in there. No vehicle could. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath shallow. As I stared into that void, something was wrong here. Something bigger than me. Something I wasn't supposed to see. I backed away, my legs unsteady, and drove back to town, the mine's shadow following me in the rearview mirror. That was the last job I took in that valley. I don't drive those roads anymore, but sometimes in the dead of night, I wake up with the smell of rotting meat in my nose, the sound of those trees whispering in my ear, and I wonder, what was in that trailer? What were they feeding in that mine? And why did it feel like it was watching me, waiting for me to come back? And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true creepy stories. I would like to again give a very special shout out to Entropic Society for lending his very special storytelling skills on this collaborated video. If all of you would, please go over to his channel. It is linked below, and show him some love. Thank you so much, Entropic. To the rest of the members of Back to Ashes, thank you all so much for your dedicated support. As I always like to say, without your support and dedication, I would not have a voice, and this channel would not exist. I cannot thank you enough. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.